This video discusses Holocaust-era medical experimentation and related human suffering. Some viewers might find the material disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. In the sprawling nightmare of the Holocaust, some figures became symbols of industrial cruelty. Others became something even darker, symbols of twisted intellect. Josef Mengele was not a battlefield commander or a politician giving fiery speeches. He was a doctor, educated, decorated, polished, and stationed at Auschwitz concentration camp, where he turned medicine into a tool of ideology. To prisoners, he was the man on the ramp with the gloved hand, calmly deciding who would work and who would die. But to twins in particular, he was something worse. From attempting to sew two twins together, conducting experiments without anesthesia, infecting his subjects to deadly diseases, gouging out eyes and experimenting with them, his experiments, driven by warped racial theories, were as scientifically useless as they were cruel. But here's the unsettling twist. After the war, he vanished. For decades, he lived freely in South America, while the world, including Israel's Mossad, hunted him. This is the story of ambition without morality and how one man in a lab coat left behind a legacy of horror that still chills history. Find out more about him in this video. Few names from the Holocaust chill the air quite like Josef Mengele. Born in 1911 in Germany, Mengele was academically gifted, earning doctorates in anthropology and medicine. On paper, he looked like a rising star in scientific circles. In reality, he became one of the most notorious physicians at Auschwitz concentration camp, where the word doctor meant something horrifyingly different. Josef Mengele was born on March 16, 1911 in Günzburg, Germany. He grew up in a wealthy, stable, middle-class family. His father, Karl Mengele, owned a successful agricultural machinery company, and the family was well respected in the community. By most accounts, Joseph had a comfortable upbringing with material security and social standing. He was described as intelligent, ambitious, and academically capable. He performed well in school and showed early interest in science and medicine. In the early 1930s, Mengele studied anthropology and medicine at universities in Munich and Frankfurt. This was a period when racial pseudoscience and eugenics were gaining academic legitimacy in parts of Europe, especially in Germany. He earned a doctorate in anthropology and later a medical degree focusing on heredity and racial classification. It was during his university years that he became increasingly aligned with Nazi ideology. He joined nationalist student groups and eventually became a member of the Nazi Party in 1937 and the SS in 1938. There were no obvious warning signs of sadism in childhood accounts. What stands out instead is ambition and ideological alignment. As Nazi racial science gained institutional legitimacy, Mengele embraced it enthusiastically. To colleagues, he was disciplined and articulate. He earned doctorates. He cultivated the image of a serious scholar. On May 30, 1943, the SS assigned Mengele to Auschwitz. There is some evidence that Mengele himself requested this assignment. When he arrived at Auschwitz concentration camp in 1943, the same polished demeanor remained, but now it operated in a radically different moral universe. When survivors later spoke about Josef Mengele, one detail appeared again and again, and it's the detail that makes his reputation especially chilling. They described him as polite. Mengele often appeared calm, well-groomed, even charming. He would smile at children, sometimes brought sweets, asked them about their names and ages in a friendly tone. Some children even called him Uncle Mengele. He would speak gently to people and then send them to gas chambers minutes later. He would stand immaculately dressed, sometimes humming or whistling, casually sorting prisoners left or right, life or death, with the flick of a gloved hand. The gesture looked small, but the consequences were absolute, and it's difficult to imagine whose fate was worse. The rejected ones faced instant death through gas chambers. The selected ones were sent for hard labor and then had twisted experiments conducted on them. Several survivors later said that the worst part was not just the physical suffering, but the betrayal. The friendly doctor persona made it harder to understand what was happening. It created false trust in a place built on deception. If the word psychopath ever wore a human face, it could have looked like Josef Mengele. His most infamous work involved experiments on identical twins. Mengele was fascinated by heredity and believed that studying identical twins could unlock secrets of racial purity. When twins arrived at the camp, they were spared immediate execution, not out of mercy, but because they were scientifically useful. He measured them obsessively, compared their physical traits, drew large amounts of blood, injected chemicals, exposed them to diseases, and performed surgeries without proper anesthesia. Twins were deliberately infected with diseases so he could observe differences in immune response. Survivors later described painful injections and procedures performed with little or no anesthesia. If one twin died, the other was deemed useless and often killed so their bodies could be compared in autopsy. In one particularly horrific experiment, Mengele attempted to change the eye pigmentation with chemical injections performed on 36 children. He infected their eyes with colored dyes, causing excruciating pain, infection, and sometimes blindness. It is estimated that 1,000 to 1,500 pairs of twins were tortured, and out of them, only about 180 survived. That would mean roughly 2,000 to 3,000 individual children and adults were subjected to his experiments. The survivors never fully recovered and suffered ill health later in their lives. Many of them don't even know what substances were injected into them. Mengele also deliberately infected prisoners with diseases such as typhus, tuberculosis, and pneuma, a severe gangrenous infection affecting malnourished children. They were also exposed to experimental substances and pharmaceuticals, though documentation is less complete here. He then monitored their progression, often comparing outcomes between paired subjects. Treatment was rarely provided. As with many Nazi medical programs, record-keeping was inconsistent and in many cases destroyed as the Nazis evacuated Auschwitz. While other Nazi doctors specialized more heavily in sterilization, Mengele participated in and supported efforts aimed at rendering prisoners infertile. Methods including radiation exposure, chemical injections, and invasive surgical procedures performed, again without proper anesthesia. The broader goal was mass sterilization of populations the Nazis deemed undesirable. Some survivors reported amputations and organ removals without medical necessity. In cases involving twins or individuals with unusual physical traits such as dwarfism or heterochromia, individuals were subjected to extensive physical examinations, spinal taps, dental extractions, and invasive internal testing. Some subjects were sometimes killed so their skeletons or organs could be preserved for study. While some survived, they described the procedures as painful and humiliating. Despite the scale of suffering, most of Mengele's research produced no meaningful scientific contribution. His work lacked proper controls, ethical standards, and methodology. Many of his experiments were not only cruel, but also scientifically worthless, driven by ideology rather than evidence. As the war turned against Nazi Germany and Hitler's empire started crumbling, Mengele fled Auschwitz in 1945 before Soviet forces liberated the camp. The world began to discover the crimes committed by Nazi doctors. There were trials conducted against doctors who had committed atrocities while working for Hitler. Unlike many high-ranking Nazis, he avoided capture. He lived under assumed identities in post-war Germany before escaping Europe in 1949 via the Red Line, also assisted by a network of former SS members. For decades, he evaded international manhunts. The man who had once decided life and death with the flick of his wrist now lived quietly, working odd jobs and relying on supporters, many of whom were his family members. For years, his family in Germany provided financial support. He even visited Europe briefly under false documents. But the 1960 capture of Adolf Eichmann, another notorious Nazi war criminal, electrified international efforts to find remaining fugitives. In the 1960s, when Mengele was living in Paraguay, Israel's intelligence service Mossad set out to capture Mengele. Spooked, he left Paraguay and settled in Brazil. With Mossad, the United States, West Germany, and Nazi hunters on the lookout, the once self-assured academic became increasingly paranoid. Associates described him as irritable, distrustful, and isolated. His health also began to suffer. By 1972, Mengele's health had been steadily deteriorating. He suffered a stroke in 1976, experienced high blood pressure, and developed an ear infection which affected his balance. On February 7, 1979, Mengele had a second stroke while swimming and drowned. He was buried under the name Wolfgang Gerhard. For 6 years, the grave remained undisturbed. In the decades after the Second World War, sightings of Josef Mengele were reported across the globe, from Greece and Egypt to Spain and Paraguay. During this time, rumors swirled. Some believed he was still alive, others speculated that he had moved again. Without a body, uncertainty lingered. Investigations continued intermittently. Survivors and Nazi hunters pushed for answers. As late as 1985, some believed he was still alive. Public interest surged that February when a mock trial was held in Jerusalem, featuring testimony from more than 100 survivors of his experiments. Soon after, West Germany, Israel, and the United States launched a coordinated effort to uncover his fate. On May 31, 1985, acting on new intelligence, West German authorities raided the home of Hans Sedlmayr, a longtime friend of Mengele. There, they discovered coded address books and correspondence, including a letter indicating Mengele had died. Documents proved that his family had helped him hide for 30 years. Working with the Brazilian police, investigators located his grave near Sao Paulo. Finally, a skeleton believed to be Mengele's was dug up on June 6, 1985. Surrounded by a large crowd of journalists, photographers, television camera crews, and local onlookers, a gravedigger worked for almost an hour before the bones were exposed. The first remains shown were the dentures, followed by the skull. Other bones, including some that were still inside a pair of trousers, were then removed from the grave. The exhumation was not a quiet forensic procedure conducted in isolation. It drew international attention. Journalists gathered, cameras rolled, photographers documented the remains being lifted from the earth. A public excavation of one of the most infamous names of the Holocaust. For survivors and their families, the moment was emotionally charged. Some expressed anger that he had escaped trial. Others felt grim confirmation that he had indeed died years earlier peacefully without facing a courtroom. Some survivors expressed a grim sense of relief that he was no longer alive and hiding, but the relief was often paired with disappointment. He had never faced trial, never testified, never been cross-examined, never sentenced. Many survivors felt robbed of that moment of public accountability, especially after seeing the impact of the Eichmann trial in 1961. The phrase, "he escaped justice," appeared repeatedly in media interviews at the time. In 1992, DNA testing confirmed the identity beyond doubt. Samples from the remains were compared with DNA from Mengele's son, Rolf. The match was definitive. His family declined requests to return the remains to Germany. His bones were studied by forensic teams and later transferred to the Sao Paulo Institute for Forensic Medicine for educational and teaching purposes. There's a stark irony here. A man who built a career on measuring bodies and reducing human beings to data points was himself disinterred, catalogued, and scrutinized under laboratory lights. He was granted a grave briefly, then that anonymity was taken away. The doctor became the specimen. He had no traditional grave to visit, no monuments marking a resting place. His remains became tools for education, clinical, labeled, stripped of ceremony. He had escaped justice in life, he did not escape identification in death. And yet, unlike at the Nuremberg trials, where leaders of defeated Nazi Germany were subjected to international criminal trials, there was no courtroom confrontation for him, no public sentencing. His death in Brazil denied that moment of visible justice. Some argue his absence leaves a lingering void. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and subscribe for more.